to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. I'm your host, Sam Mickey, and this week I'm really happy to welcome onto the show Blair Nelsen. Blair, thanks for making time for us.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're the executive director of Waterspirit, which is a very interesting organization. It's a spiritual ecology nonprofit that informs, inspires, and empowers people of all beliefs to deepen their consciousness of the sacredness of water and the interdependence of all Earth's systems. So I'm excited to talk to you about what Waterspirit's up to and the other kinds of work you do. But first, I always want to hear just a kind of, I don't know, autobiography of how you got into this work, because it's still the case, I think, that when most people think about environmental issues, they think about policy or science or activism, but the spiritual side of things isn't necessarily first and foremost on people's minds. And then likewise, when people think of spirituality, they don't necessarily think about nature or a relationship to the earth. So how did you come to a point where those two things intersected for you?
Honestly, the point where they intersected for me was when I first started picking up books on Wicca and neo-paganism when I was a middle schooler,
Hmm.
because those are earth-centered spiritualities. And as soon as I got exposed to these materials, something just clicked inside of me. Like, yes, of course, the earth is sacred. Yes, of course, when I do earth protecting work, that has a spiritual impulse behind it to protect the great mother, to protect the community of life. And so it was always inside of me, something that was intrinsically linked, but I didn't fully realize that I could articulate that explicitly through my work in the world until much later on in my career, until I moved whole chapters of my life and found myself at Yale Divinity School studying with Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Graham, and realized that there was a whole path where this religion and ecology work or spiritual ecology work could be explicitly articulated.
Nice. Yeah, so many people, I mean, especially on this podcast, of course, it's the Forum on Religion and Ecology. And so many of us have Mary Evelyn and John as a kind of key point as to like, well, I had this inside of me, but then I didn't realize that there was a career possibility. And then they're like, oh, no, come right this way. Uh, so yeah, interesting with Wicca. What were some of any particular authors? Uh,
Oh, I like to joke around that I was part of the Llewellyn tradition. It's a joke because Llewellyn is a publishing house that published like a number of the books that I was finding on the shelves at Barnes and Noble in the New Age section back in the mid to late 90s. So it was very much a relationship between authors on a page and myself, informing and crafting my own earth honoring spirituality based on what I was reading, rather than say practicing through a community or a different lineage.
Right,
Um,
right. I like that, the Llewellyn tradition. Yeah, that counts, really. Yeah, it's amazing how much a publisher can kind of capture a whole sense of spirituality and sense of place. And you're just like, I'm just reading anything they're publishing, I'll read. And the whole magic of going to a bookstore and just seeing what's in the section. These days, I feel like people are, just going online and searching for things so much. It's a very different experience than just going to be like, let's see what Barnes and Noble has to offer.
it's true. And this is, support your local independent bookstores, get out there and make some better choices. But what I was exposed to was that one place that had its own like colorful collection of items to take a look at, and it had a particular smell and vibe to it. And it's just the way that my story wound up. But you're right, there's something to be said for putting us in the way of discovering unexpected things, like finding those moments where the wonder and novel of the unexpected can jump out.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there's a handful of philosophers and writers that I've been very big fans of, largely because that's just the book that was on the shelf there. And so I gave it a try and was like, oh, this is very interesting. If it was up to me searching for something, who knows what I would have found. So yeah, the serendipity of that is pretty special.
And it's wonderful that nowadays there are more ways, even of the like stumbling through the bookstore and finding things that speak out to you, more ways of connecting with this field of spiritual ecology, even through the intellectual work and the spiritual work that's been published on this subject. Nowadays, there's a whole rainbow of authors and perspectives that are doing this work on the page as well as face to face in community. And it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Like the last 10 or 15 years, to see the difference between the number of organizations doing this kind of work, the publications, graduate programs, undergraduate classes. Yeah, it's really exploded. And so part of that is the work you've done with Waterspirit. Waterspirit, was that founded in a Catholic lineage, but it's actually very interreligious and kind of open. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how Waterspirit began, and then how did you wind up as the executive director?
Absolutely. So Water Spirit was founded back in 1998 by Sister Suzanne Golis, who is a sister of St. Joseph of Peace. So at the time, there weren't a whole lot of organizations doing this sort of work. So she felt very much on the vanguard, especially using water as the explicit point of focus of the spiritual ecology work. Suzanne had been exposed to the thought of Thomas Berry, important theologian in this lineage that we share through the Forum on Religion and Ecology, right? So it was really Thomas Berry's work and exposure to others who were inspired by his writings and teachings that led her to create the idea of water spirits 25 years ago. And so this opening within her as to what it meant to connect with the waters of the Jersey Shore, what it meant to connect with Earth, led her to design this mission that, while everything that Water Spirit does is consistent with Catholic social teaching as understood by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace as a whole, as reflected in the core values of their subsidiary organizations, Peace Ministries, and the other sponsored ministries throughout New Jersey. At the same time, Water Spirit's programs and our day-to-day work and our advocacy work is crafted to be accessible to people from any faith background or from the increasingly large spiritual but not religious group as well. Wherever you're coming from, we try to make this a place where you can access something greater, whatever that is to you, that you can feel in the connection with water, connection with earth, and share that in community.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, it's part of, I guess, the Catholicity of being Catholic. It's supposed to be universal, and so technically that means it can't just be Catholic. So I appreciate anytime Catholics reach beyond Catholicism. I feel like that's really them living up to their own creed. And I know, especially after Vatican II, that was really made explicit. There's rays of light in all religious traditions and all ways of life, and we need to just be open to all of it. I think that's one of the great things about spiritual ecology. So when we frame it in terms of spirituality, like everybody has something that's some sense of something bigger than themselves that they participate in. Uh, so I'm curious, what kind of work do you all do? What are some of the projects that you've engaged in?
Well, we've continued in the legacy of the programs and advocacy that were already in action for many years when I stepped into this role 4 years ago when Sister Suzanne retired. So we have a number of heritage programs, including our solstice and equinox celebrations so on Friday night, that's what we were doing, celebrating the arrival of the autumn. And those are beautiful, beautiful community building sessions that are fun for the whole family and moving and meaningful. I love our seasonal celebrations. On top of that, we do a weekly meditation for Earth. That's both in person and live streamed to our YouTube channel. We have a spiritual ecology book club that has been meeting on Zoom since the pandemic. Really good titles selected for that group. We have lots of fun learning together. And then we do community programs and school programs on different water issues, one-off programs on mindfulness in nature. We love going where we're invited to reach more people throughout New Jersey and beyond. And since I've come on board, I've added additional programming in the field of climate distress and climate emotions.
Mm.
So the biggest work that we do in that field is we run 10-week-long eco-anxiety support groups following a method created by a group called the Good Grief Network.
Yeah.
Fantastic organization, fantastic program. Just a peer-to-peer support group that meets on Zoom for 10 weeks, but it's amazing how transformational and moving that can be for so many people. Part of Catholic social teaching is reading the signs of the times and making sure that the work that we do in the world is keeping up with what the world needs at this moment in time. So, climate change, water, we can't protect water without addressing the climate crisis. And part of the ways that I stepped up and that Waterspirit stepped up to address the signs of the times when dealing with water and climate was we realized that people need this kind of support. Is I'm so tired of seeing people burn out. I'm so tired of people feeling like they can't bring their whole selves to the table when coming up with how we're going to show up to address the climate crisis. So the climate anxiety work has been a key part of this moment of Waterspirit's functioning. And every so often we do programs that are intended for specific religious communities. So last year we launched a climate pastoral care course, which is an online self-paced course intended for caregivers in Christian contexts to get everybody up to speed about the climate crisis, about how climate grief and climate anxiety can show up in your communities, how to talk to kids, how to talk to all these different groups of people, how to handle congregational conflict around the climate crisis, all these different little pieces of the puzzle in this really comprehensive online self-paced course. So that's another way that we've been doing the climate anxiety, climate distress work as well. And then in addition to all of this great slate of programmings, that's complemented by the collective action piece. So we address different water and climate issues, mostly in the state of New Jersey, some at the United Nations as well. And our three big buckets of work are environmental justice and water quality, stormwater management and green infrastructure, and renewable energy and climate change. So we've got a number of different campaigns running at any given point of time, lots of ways lots of opportunities for volunteers to plug into these campaigns, as well as ways of taking action from home, signing letters, sending letters, and so forth. So the idea is that we do the personal internal work of transformation in connection with Earth, and then channel that into the community and collective work, and then support that community collective work by returning to source, by returning to the inner work as well. So one feeds on the other. That's why the programs and advocacy are such a key part of the way we do the work. I like to call it regenerative activism. I hope that's a term that catches on.
Oh, I like that a lot. Regenerative activism. Yeah, because so often the individual side and the collective side are really seen as at odds with one another, and which does result in a lot of burnout. And people are like, "Oh, it's just this personal burden," or then it's all such an effort to try to engage in large systems that are so beyond you. You're like, how can I do that? So yeah, no, I like that a lot. Regenerative activism. Yeah, I hope that catches on. I'm honestly surprised that I haven't heard that before. It's such a great term, and I think being regenerative, sustainability was kind of a buzzword a long time ago. People kind of that's clearly not enough, and regeneration is such a more enlivening kind of idea.
Yeah.
You mentioned the work with the United Nations. I know that's part of what you do is being a representative to the UN. What's going on there? The United Nations Water Conference. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, because they don't hold that regularly, right?
That's correct. The last water conference was held back in the 70s.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty bad, really. It's like, as if water issues are solved. We don't need to address that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a cross-cutting issue that one of the big outcomes of the water conference that was held in New York back in March and lasted for 3 days was that everybody was able to explicitly articulate the need to address water more often in more spaces, to direct more UN funding toward addressing water issues, particularly around Sustainable Development Goal 6 on clean water and sanitation. And it became very clear that it's ridiculous that water hasn't been the explicit focus since the 70s. So that looks like it's going to lead to more frequent meetings, in addition to the way that SDG 6 was addressed during the High Level Political Forum and the SDG Summit, which both just happened fairly recently.
Right. That's good. Well, I hope so. Yeah, it's really surprising to me. I don't know, something about water. It's easy to kind of background and ignore, and it's just part of our lives. As long as the tap is running, you don't think about it really, and easy to take for granted. So yeah, kind of pouring water into our consciousness is such a big part of the work.
It is. So I was just watching a webinar surrounding this new exhibition that's up at Radcliffe at Harvard these days. It just opened. It's all about water, and they were discussing exactly that difficulty. That water is so everyday that we tend to ignore it. So part of the challenge of putting up an artistic exhibition about water, for example, is re-enchanting water,
Mm.
helping the audience step back from it so they can see it in a new way. And there's an element of that in the work that we do as well. That's why the programming piece is so important as well. To stop, to breathe, to connect, to be present with water, to remember how truly dependent we are on her, and to remember the sacredness of that connection, to re-enchant water in that way. That then becomes what moves us on a deeper level, to fuel us into action, to carry that awareness into our day to day.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and the work of, art, education, religion. Yeah, there's so many ways where people can connect to that kind of enchanting power of water. Yeah, that's really special. I wonder in your own personal life, how does that show up? 'Cause I know some people, are all about things like shorter showers or make sure you turn off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth, little things like that. I wonder what are some of the tips or strategies that you do that maybe the average person isn't thinking of beyond just like shutting off the tap when you're brushing your teeth.
Well, turning off the lights too, because
Mm.
electricity generation uses a huge amount of water as well. So I try to look for some of those moments that aren't as intuitive as well, like shutting off the lights is also a water saving measure. Um, the food choices you make have a huge impact on water as well. So my family went vegan a number of years ago, and that reduces our water impact, especially in the moments where we're able to make more local food choices as well, like diminishing that impact as much as we can. And I will say that in addition to explicitly conserving water in our day-to-day habits, and to do things like reduce how much plastic we're using, because plastic gets into the waterways at an alarming rate. And in addition to doing those little things that many of us know, the basics of what we can do in our day-to-day lives to cut back, at the same time, I would add that nobody can be a perfect environmental saint in their daily choices. I said nobody, that's very strong. Maybe there are some people who can, in fact, but the majority in this, what, like Western US society that I'm living in right now, we are enmeshed in systems that limit our choices in ways that are often beyond our control. And so while we have to do the personal or family level, like in this local work in our households, we have to couple that with collective action as well, because collective solutions are needed so that more people have more choices that can then be more responsible. So you need the empowering of
Yeah.
the day to day, but you need the systems change at the same time.
Yeah, and that seems to be a kind of fundamental part of what you're doing at Water Spirit is precisely making that connection. It's like, all right, the personal, but then the collective, and then the collective can then enrich the personal, and you're just
Mhm.
constantly in that cycle. Yeah, otherwise, just what a burden to tell somebody like, hey, figure it out, save it, save water
Save it
yourself.
all. Yeah, it you can freeze up and think, well, what am I supposed to do now? How am I even supposed to live in the world when everything I do has an impact that I can see, and a much greater impact that I can't even see, which feels so out of control? No, you have to take the steps that feel empowering, that make you feel connected and remind you of your own agency, in order to push for the changes that will make everything better for everybody, caring for the common good in that way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've definitely known some people who have put too much responsibility on themselves, and you can tell it that it's overwhelming them, and then that limits their ability to act effectively in their communities because they're just trying to do so much themselves. It's like, you know what? Every now and again, if you need to take a long shower, take a long shower. Every night, if that's going to help you show up in the world in an empowered way where you can engage your community. We can't have these purity tests where if you did something a little wrong, then now, well, you're not a good environmentalist anymore. But yeah, especially in our society, the United States is pretty bad when it comes to environmental impacts. So have to be a little gentle on ourselves about it.
And especially because the impact of the average household compared to the impact of the average, say, petroleum company is significantly different.
Yeah. Oh,
Where,
yeah, so different. Well, I wonder, one of the things I like to, speaking of petroleum companies, one of the things I like to ask people these days on the podcast is what's bothering you? I'd like to, speaking of like environmental emotions and things like that, anger has a place in activism, in our thinking. And so I like to, give people a chance to kind of air some grievances. So in the world of water or in the world of religious environmentalism or whatever it is, what's a thing that just kind of makes you upset lately?
I mean, there's no shortage of that, Sam, truly.
Right. Yeah.
But and I recognize this is a question that you're asking a lot of people, so I do want to give you an answer, and I'm going to add on to it. I mean, there is just no shortage. The one that immediately leaps to mind right now is, I was out in the streets in New York marching with 75,000 people on Sunday. And so the changes that are needed are just so tremendous. Like, we need a climate emergency. We need President Biden to declare one, direct resources to address the climate crisis in a very real way. There's the American Climate Corps that just got formed, which is incredibly exciting news. But we also still need to couple that with elimination of subsidies for fossil fuel companies. Like, it's not the only thing that needs to happen. It's very good, but like the anger toward the companies is still there in me. The anger toward anyone in a position of power who prioritizes um, their own, ultimately their own greed over like caring for the common good, caring for the collective. Like, if I'm okay and I'm living in the lap of luxury and I'm all set, then it doesn't matter what happens to everybody else. Like, anybody who's embracing that attitude just feels immoral to me. And that's what gets my goat. And so it makes me angry. But I will say, I experienced a period of activism burnout in my mid 20s after starting up a small scale nonprofit in the Amazon, in the Brazilian Amazon. And I was angry every single day. And there was a lot to be angry about. And I could feel myself boiling on the inside all the time. And that anger led to burnout and led to years of not being able to show up for the work as I was taking care of my own healing and resetting of my relationship to myself and my understanding of how I wanted to show up in the world. So anger is a powerful activator, but I am skeptical of its power to sustain us for more than the short burst. I think nowadays I lean more toward it's ultimately the love that sustains us. It's a love that gets us up in a way that will keep us showing up for the fight and invite us into finding our own superpowers and our own particular gifts for showing up as a whole person, showing up in ways that will be able to sustain long term.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, I like that point of anger is a good activator, but cannot sustain you. And then, because then you're kind of like always in some fight or flight response, and that's just too intense. Like the nervous system can't handle that. So yeah, good that anger can wake you up to something, but then it's got to wake you up to what you love, what you care about, and then you can engage from there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wonder if you could say more about the Good Grief Network, because I've heard of them a little bit, and it seems like increasingly people keep mentioning it. I'm like, all right, I got to really check this out. And it seems like a good organization for dealing with things like that, because the anger, the grief, the negative emotions that we all experience around these issues. And so this group, this network is I think, really empowering people to work through these negative emotions.
Yes, they're one of many groups doing very important work in this field of climate psychology. But Good Grief Network was my entry into this work. If I'm not mistaken, they started their activities in 2016 around this 10-step method, which was loosely inspired by the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step method. And since that time, they've trained a number of different facilitators to run their groups. They invite affiliate organizations to get trained and run the program. So Waterspirit runs an affiliate group of Good Grief Network 10-step programs, and Good Grief now has a variety of other workshops and journaling programs and a shorter version of the 10 steps for teens. They're doing a variety of programs nowadays. It's not just the 10 steps, but their models are peer-to-peer, very heart-centered, very justice-oriented. And it's been the method that clicked. And I adore the founders, adore the executive director. They're just excellent people to be in community doing this work with. And when I say they're going back to the authors and the writings that are available nowadays, I had the opportunity to attend an event in Brooklyn on Thursday, which is a slate of 3 climate authors, not the Good Grief Network folks, but the Good Grief Network folks I was texting with throughout the throughout the event, because they all know the authors who are on the panel personally. I got to get them out here someday. But it's like the authors were sharing really fantastic tips about how to do this emotional work, but with a justice lens, justice awareness, how to do with an awareness need to communities and strong communities of mutual aid and support. And I am sitting there squirming in my chair because of how badly I want to jump up and add the faith piece to it. Sometimes the climate psychologists and the faith communities are too siloed for my tastes, and I want to see them talking together. Faith communities are communities that are often already gifted in supporting each other through tough times, who are used to finding complicated hope in situations of adversity, who are used to supporting each other through grief in the Christian tradition, that have rituals of lament. There's a lot of potential for those communities, which include billions of people worldwide, right, that belong to different faith communities, for those communities to be mobilized toward climate care and for caring for each other, using the tools, using understanding gleaned from climate psychology in order to be better caregivers in their own communities. And I just want to see the faith piece added to the conversation
It's
too.
like, what about faith? Yeah, it's true though. I mean, we're still very much, sometimes people say we're in a post-secular society. I'm like, no, we're still largely secular. I know, religions come back into the public sphere in some ways, and certainly with, nonprofits like Waterspirit. But by and large, like psychologists, it's easy to do psychology and just kind of focus on psychology, and you've managed to just not pay attention to all of the insights from all of the world's religious traditions. So yeah, we always need somebody in the audience who's like, excuse me, religion. Don't forget about religion in this context.
Right. And I'm not suggesting that they are the same thing or interchangeable in every instance. I'm saying I want to see the two in conversation to mutually support each other more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's like 2.3 billion Christians on the planet. There's a billion Hindus. It's like if you can speak this language, you can really activate massive amounts of people. And when you ignore that language, you really ignore it to your own peril. And it's like, well, you can speak to certain people, but you're really missing the vast majority of the human species. So yeah, so
Yeah.
important. And I'm just a big advocate for religious literacy for that reason. Like, if you want to talk to people, you got to know how to speak their language a little bit.
Yeah. Especially when we're talking about behavioral change too, like environmental work has to deal with how to get people in groups to change their behaviors, to change their decision making. And sometimes I do believe what's going to resonate so deeply within that behavioral change becomes possible is accessing people on the level of their religious and spiritual beliefs, is accessing them on that deepest ground of their morality. Like that's where the shifts that are lasting can really begin. And it's one more tool that needs to be better recognized and utilized, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, especially these days, if there's any tool in the toolbox that we can use, like use them all. Now is not
Yeah.
a time to ignore any tools. If you got
Mm-hmm.
anything, use it. I know, Catherine Hayhoe, the climate scientist, speaks to that a lot as an
Yep.
evangelical Christian. She's
Yeah.
like, sometimes the facts don't matter to people, but when you talk about faith and you say, well, why did God put us here? We're supposed to be stewards of creation. And then people are like, oh, yeah, okay. I'll take action. I'll change my life. But when you show me some graphs and some facts and figures, it doesn't doesn't hit you in the heart in the same way.
Precisely. Oh, she was such an inspiration to the climate pastoral care course as
Mm.
well. Her global weirding videos are fantastic. Water Spirits Book Club read Saving Us when it
Ah,
first
nice.
came out. Yeah, she's fabulous.
That's great. That sounds like a good book club.
Yeah,
I
you
need to
want to
get in
join?
on that. I know, really, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how I've been missing it this whole time. Like, how did I not know? Uh, well, here's another question on the flip side of things that kind of cause anger. On the opposite side, what are some things that make you hopeful? Speaking of Catherine Hayhoe, somehow manages to continually be hopeful, and that's not always easy. But there's some things that'll kind of light that fire where you're excited, you're hopeful, you're inspired. So, what's something that's kind of activating that for you these days?
Yeah, yeah. Hope comes up all the time, especially in environmental protection and especially in climate work, right? It's like we're not allowed to talk about climate change anymore unless we throw in something about what makes us feel hopeful. And that's a tough one because hope and what it is or is not can be a very complicated question.
Mhm.
And when I feel hopeful, it is often hope with some qualifying word in front of it, like complicated hope
Mhm.
or something else. I normally focus more or feel more like courage and the sense of doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do rather than a hope that looks like, oh, I'm assured of a good outcome. And therefore, my hope is based on a particular outcome. And I think my hope comes after action for
Mhm.
me. And yeah, and honestly, yeah, I think what gives me hope too is how often I'm in spaces where I hear people sharing an awareness, which has been dawning in me as well, which is we are not humans as discrete individuals inserted into landscapes, and that's our function, that's our being, that's our life. Rather, we are of the earth. We are cells of the planetary body. And as earthlings, as beings in the earth community that make up her, she is able to speak through us. She is able to guide us into earth honoring action and into right relationship. And I know that I'm borrowing a number of phrases now from Robin Wall Kimmerer and other Indigenous thinkers, but that's truly my like font of hope right now. Is that sometimes when we feel very, very lost, I remember that in fact we are figuring things out together and we are not alone because the earth has the capacity to speak through us if we remove all the barriers and access that voice. Right action is available.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I think that that's something that's just increasingly happening. Even ideas of like an ecological self are becoming much more widespread, and people are kind of tapping into this of like, oh right, I'm not just this skin encapsulated ego, but in fact am an expression of the earth or an expression of the whole universe for that matter.
Yeah.
And that's certainly something a very key point in Thomas Berry's work. That we're not just on the earth, but we are the earth reflecting on itself and coming to know itself. And here's from astronauts as well, right? The kind of overview effect. People go into space and they look at the earth and they're like, oh, like that's us. I'm
Yeah.
the earth looking down at myself somehow. And yeah, it's a profound realization. And I think when we tap into that, we're tapping into some profoundly regenerative capacities. Like, all right, this isn't just us trying to fix this thing out there called the environment, but in fact,
Exactly.
this is Earth kind of learning to regenerate and repair itself.
Precisely. Yeah, Thomas Berry has that wonderful line about how we're not a collection of objects, but rather a communion of subjects. We are intertwined, we are in this together, and that means that the solutions will require us all together as well.
Yep, makes it sound easy that way.
Yeah.
Like, all right, just have this realization, then everything will kind of work itself out. And of course, it's more complicated. I like that your term, complicated hope. That's a nice way to put it. Like, yeah, hopeful, but it's still complicated.
Yeah, it's not an easy or a saccharine hope. And it's not something you can sprinkle in at the end of, say, an article about climate change to be like, oh, well, everything's not as bad as perhaps it seemed throughout the rest of everything you're reading. It's like, no, no, it is. And there is certainly work to be done here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, just a whole litany of terrible things at the end, but I'm hopeful. Like
Hmm.
that's not fooling anybody. I know Joanna Macy has a nice term, active hope.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, that's a good one. And yeah, it's so important. We always have to qualify specifically what we mean. I know Kate Marvel, the climate scientist, has kind of mentioned we don't need hope, we need courage. We've had enough
Hmm.
hope. Shut up about hope for a minute. And like, let's get on with courage. Let's learn how to act in the face of fear. And then, and then hope can be along with that. But if
Hmm.
you gotta act, you gotta be out there participating in something larger than yourself.
Yeah, tick, tick, ticks. There's a module on hope, agency, and community that wraps up the climate pastoral care course. Yep, Joanna Macy's in there, Kate Marvel's in there, Mariana East Hegler's in there,
Ah, nice.
Vaclav Havel. Yeah, some good ones.
Ah,
And
nice.
Rebecca Solnit, of course, Hope in the Dark.
Yeah. Yeah, every time I read something by Rebecca Solnit, I'm just like, wow, that's why she's Rebecca Solnit. Just fantastic writer and deep well of inspiration.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's exciting. You're doing a lot of really great work, and all these things intersecting, and all with water. I really appreciate that. There's something about water that can kind of hold all these issues.
Yeah,
Because I feel like climate change has become like the word for environmental issues. And like, there's
true.
a lot of things beyond climate, and it's easy to forget about that. And sometimes, well,
Hmm.
the climate's the biggest thing because it covers the whole planet. Like, well, water covers a lot of the planet as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
really appreciate how the focus on water ends up being a kind of context through which to look at all these different environmental issues, electricity usage, plastics, climate. So I wonder, what are some of the other water issues that people don't normally realize are in fact water issues, like electricity, for instance?
Yeah. Well, water is also a great lens through which to do this work because violations against water, ecological sins against water, become really transparent as such.
Hmm.
Nobody doesn't know that water is critical for us to drink every day, that we need it in our households. You don't have water in your house for a day, you feel it. Like it's it makes the justice work really pure and really clear. So when I think about less about like the water used by electricity, I think about the environmental protection issues that people don't always forefront when they're thinking about where are we going to put our energy, where are our campaigns. And we started doing work on utility justice, especially during the COVID-19 lockdowns, because more people were at risk of getting their utilities shut off, including their water utilities, at a time when washing our hands was one of the best defenses people thought against this pandemic. So, like, there's that overlap of water and human health. And when you think about water protection issues, you might not immediately go toward protections for low income peoples who can't pay their utility bills, but it's like that is frontline new. That's of crucial importance. Water justice and utility justice are folded into the Poor People's Campaigns platform, particularly in the bill that they introduced recently, the Third Reconstruction Act.
Hmm.
Um, and Waterspirit has gotten involved with Poor People's Campaign. We're in a leadership position here in New Jersey as well, so that water issues aren't just about what you can physically see when you go down to the beach. It is about the pollution issue, particularly plastic pollution. Um, it is about in our region better solutions for flooding. It is about getting CSOs out of our community, and it's also about making sure that people have that access to clean, safe water everywhere, everywhere. Like Pope Francis in Laudato Si calls us to ecological conversion,
Hmm.
for a shift in mindset that is as profound as religious conversion in favor of pro-environmental behaviors. And I want to take it a step further. We all need an aquatic conversion.
Hmm.
It is powerful when we bring the lens of the sacredness of water into our day to day.
That's really good. Yeah, I like that, an aquatic conversion. Yeah, I know Pope Francis is working on some kind of follow-up to Laudato Si that's supposed to be coming out soon. So
October 4th, St. Francis's
it's
Day.
pretty soon. And yeah, I'll be really curious. Hopefully he might listen to this and last minute add something about aquatic conversion. that would be nice. I don't know. I feel like the Pope isn't listening to the podcast as much as he should be. But
Mm.
he'd get a couple good things out of it: regenerative activism, aquatic conversion, and I really
If you
appreciate that so much. The idea that it's conversion like a religious conversion.
Precisely, he's got a great line in there, which I'm going to misquote right now because I don't have it up in front of me. But he does say that care for creation is not a secondary aspect or an optional aspect of being Christian. It's central to Christian identity.
Yeah,
So, doing this work that I get to do now in this position post 2015, post Laudato Si, is the tremendously exciting time to do it. If Christian communities could just live into that directive, that caring for creation is a central aspect to my Christian identity, everything would change. That would be so thrilling.
yeah, yeah.
That's what we're
Can you
looking toward.
imagine? Yeah, like billions of Christians on the planet. Like that's massive amounts of transformation. And
Yeah.
it seems like it's happening just a little slower than I'd like.
Just a
Like
little, right?
it's
Just a
just a
little.
little. If we could pick up the pace just a little bit, it'd be nice.
Yes,
It's
well,
like
water is persistent. Nothing if not persistent when it wears away and creates change. So we'll continue to flow like water and do our work and
yeah.
affect change little by little.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw the Grand Canyon when I was a really little kid, and my dad was explaining this was carved out by water. I was like, "Nah, that's impossible." I just refused to believe it. I'm like, "No way! How could? I mean, I've seen water. I know what water does. It's not going to make a canyon like this." And like patience and persistence, and yeah, that's a good lesson from Taoism, especially, right? Flow like water, and it'll accomplish everything without any effort, really. And at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but I think it's kind of slow. So yeah, pick up the pace just a little bit would be nice.
Well, we'll see what we can do. You're at 4. I don't know if you've had a chance to read Elizabeth McAnally's book, Loving Water Across
Oh
Religions,
yeah.
but that's another one we got to pick up for book club a little
Oh
while
nice.
ago. And she has some truly delightful insights about baptism and the how powerful it would be if Christian communities could live into the awareness that when Jesus was baptized, he baptized all waters, he made all waters sacred. And if we carry that connection with the sacredness of water into everything that we do, wouldn't that also change everything?
Yeah.
And yeah, and that I mean, boiling it down, that's a lot of the heart of the work at Waterspirit as well. If we carry that consciousness, if we re-enchant water and realize it's not just an inert natural resource there for human use, but rather sacred in and of itself, that reorients us to the world
Yeah.
in all these different ways. And the programs and advocacy flow from that fundamental reorientation, that reenchantment, that sacredness.
Yeah, right. It's such a profound change in consciousness. To like, what is water? Well, it's a resource. Like, what if it was sacred? And such a different. I mean, speaking again, if it's not a collection of objects, we're a communion of subjects. What if we saw that subjectivity in water
Yeah.
completely changes the way you see the world, the way you see yourself? Yeah, we had Elizabeth McAnally on the podcast a couple of years ago. I don't know. I've lost track. But yeah, wonderful book.
Yeah.
So yeah, good plug for all the water people out there. It's it because I don't know. I'm not sure if word has gotten out, but yeah, loving water across religions, across
Mm-hmm.
traditions, across
Religions.
religions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and especially the kind of double entendre of loving water. It's like we're loving water, but it's also that water is loving water. Water
Mm-hmm.
has this kind of love in it. It has that sacred power in it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's not just the object of our love, it's a subject of love.
We were talking earlier about love versus anger fueling the actions, right? So maybe that is one of the lessons from water, how to do this persistent work with love.
Yeah, and it fits really well in the Christian tradition, especially because clearly there's a decent amount of anger in in Jesus and versus like the Roman Empire and the oppressive systems he's resisting. And like, what do you do with that anger? Love. And I know like Martin Luther King is a good example of that, where he's like, we need some transformative power that can turn an enemy into a friend, and love can do that in a way that just righteous indignation can't quite get done.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, I wonder, speaking of, the actions that we need to do and bringing love to this kind of work, what's next? What are you up to in the near future or in the next year or so? But what are some projects that you're looking to on the horizon right now?
Well, our programs are continuing apace, and we're getting increasingly invited to run different community events and get into schools. So there's lots of exciting developments, lots of ways of reaching people directly through our programs, which I'm thrilled about. With our advocacy campaigns, one that's jumping out at me, particularly at this moment, is our campaign to pass a green amendment in New Jersey.
Hmm.
So the short version of this campaign is that a green amendment is a statewide constitution level amendment that would give us that would ensure our right to clean water, clean air, and healthy environments for this and future generations, and give that the same level of protection as our right to free speech and our right to practice whatever religion we want. And the the Green Amendment movement is nationwide.
Hmm.
There are only, if I'm not mistaken, 3 or 4 states that have green amendments in their constitutions. Interestingly, Montana is one of them.
Hmm.
And so the Held versus Montana case was successful in that state because they had a green amendment to rely upon. So here in New Jersey, we want one too. It's time for us to catch up. Pennsylvania has had one for a while. New York just passed there, so we want to complete the swath of the region, getting New Jersey Green Amendment passed, and that languaging closely echoes the right to a healthy environment that was passed by the UN Human Rights Council and the UN General Assembly last year. So we have this international level example of this being the global ethic. We have a human right to healthy environments. And there's no reason why that shouldn't be reflected in our state level protections as well. So that's a huge one that's coming up.
That's
We're
big.
pushing for that green amendment, and we've seen that it works now with Healthy Montana.
Yeah.
Exciting. Yeah.
I
And we've
wonder
got some
for
work.
anybody who doesn't know about that case, I wonder if you could describe it just really briefly, the Montana case.
Yeah, extremely briefly, it's worth digging up and looking into the details of it, but it's a case where young people from Montana sued the government for inadequately protecting their future because of their investments in different environment destroying projects.
Yeah.
So that's the very condensed version, but it's worth going after the deeper dive of what the case is about and why it worked in that instance. But green
Yeah.
amendments are the key to
Yeah. I didn't
that
realize
success.
the Green Amendment was part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's super exciting. So good luck. I hope that that you get that to happen for New Jersey. So anyway,
Thank you.
I interrupted. What else? What else you got going on?
Oh, I could talk about our campaigns all day. There's a big movement to divest the New Jersey state pension from fossil fuels.
Hmm.
So we got a big workshop coming up on October 21st. And in coalition throughout the state, we're promoting more awareness about stormwater utilities, what
Hmm.
they are, and how they can help us create better stormwater management systems in our towns and counties. And so those are some of the big exciting things that are in the works at this moment. And there's a whole lot more. You got to check out our website. Campaigns
Yeah.
are fast paced. Yeah.
I know, right? Yeah. It's funny because, a term like water spirit, you're like, oh, it seems like it's mostly about just connecting to the sacredness of water. It's like, oh yeah, that and all this political engagement. It's really fantastic because I just see those as often kind of opposed. People forget that the inner work and the outer work are kind of connected.
Absolutely.
And you're making it so patently obvious, like, no, they have to be connected, and this is how you do it.
That's our goal.
And I think, I mean, especially in New Jersey, when you think of like stormwater, like that's the storms have been getting pretty severe. I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit because I've never lived on the East Coast. It's different problems in California to deal with. We have wildfires. Like my school was shut down last week because smoke from Northern California and Oregon was just invading the Bay Area, and it got really bad really fast. So
Yeah.
different issues. But I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to what's been going on storm wise in New Jersey, because I know it's not easy. I know Waterspirit in particular has gotten hit by some of that, and your office has moved.
Mhm, mhm. Well, some of the issues are the same. You folks out in California did have a hurricane recently,
That's
so
true. Yeah, they're
eek.
coming our way now.
Oh, yeah. So yes, excess of water is often an issue in many parts of New Jersey, from major storms like hurricanes, but also just from increasingly sunny day flooding.
Mm,
Sea level is rising, and the groundwater level is rising as well. We have folks on staff whose homes were never in a flood zone or never flooded that have gotten hit by different storms as the intensity of them increases over time. Our story is that, well, the Waterspirit story is that we were at an oceanfront retreat center that sustained some damage during Hurricane Sandy.
mm,
That kind of set off a series of events, including an environmental impact report showing that eventually the water is going to get up to the streets. That led the sisters to the decision to let that property go. And that led to us moving into our wonderful home now, which is inside of a Presbyterian church. They're an earth care congregation.
mm.
So they already had this environmental care resonance. So we seemed like a very nice, good neighbors and a good fit for each other. That's part of it. Yeah, it really, in New Jersey, major issues are where is the water going and how is it being handled? We need more green infrastructure solutions. We need to deal with the combined sewage overflow systems, the CSOs. In several parts of New Jersey, there's been greater investment to getting lead pipes out of our systems, but there's still more work to do. And
Mm.
there are great groups doing that work, especially in frontline communities. I'm thinking about Newark Water Coalition in particular now, but there are more. And um, yeah, and then the water quality issues on top of that, like plastic pollution, like bacterial runoff. In our local watershed, there's still issues with different water quality and with E. coli in the water after major
Mm.
storm events. So there's a lot of water work to be done, even in our backyard.
Yeah, geez. Yeah, it's funny. Some places like California, for instance, drought is the main issue, and then other places it's an excess of water. Just like we just can't find a nice balance. That's definitely the main moral of the story when you look at environmental issues. It's just the Earth is so out of balance right now,
Yeah.
and you're doing great work to kind of restore that balance. Like, well, if only we could see that we are the Earth, then we can start to have that right relationship to it. We can act in a way that finds that balance again, and it's really, really inspiring. One of the things I really like about this podcast is I get to talk to people who are doing such inspiring work. So, asking, what gives you hope? What gives me hope is that people like you are out there with Waterspirit, and not then to say like, "Hey, go fix it for the rest of us." It's your responsibility,
Yeah.
but it's really, really inspiring work. So, thanks so much for sharing it with us.
It's been a delight. I love what I do. I love what I get to do because I'm in this position at Waterspirit, and I'm always excited to share it with people. Waterspirit.org is our website, full of what we've got coming up on our events calendar. We send out a weekly email. We're all over different social media channels, all the usual places, and there's always a way to plug in because not everybody can do the work in the same way that we do all the time, but you can always support that work in a number of ways by donating, by sharing, by following the content that we put out there and talking about it around the dinner table with your community of people. There's
Yeah,
always ways to get out there. And we know that we're not doing this work alone. It's all of us
yeah,
together, whether we see it or not.
beautifully said. Yeah, I'll make sure to put the link to your website in the show notes for the
Great.
episode because yeah, people got to check it out, and you're offering so many great ways to connect, and especially things like the book club, regular emails, things where people don't have to be in the immediate vicinity and they can still share in the work that you're doing.
Right. That was one of the unexpected um, pluses of lockdown was that we got better at reaching beyond our backyard too, using more online tools to connect. So now there is
Yeah.
definitely a variety of ways to keep up with what's going on here.
Yeah, nice to see some benefits from what was otherwise such a tragic situation. Same with this podcast that we started in 2020, and it was one of those things like, well, since we're all online now, let's reach people in this medium. And so, yeah, really excellent work.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. And the
Yeah,
forum does excellent work too. I mean, I found this job through a posting on the forum mailer. So we're all
right. Yeah,
connected.
yeah. Again, nice shout out to Elizabeth McAnally, the newsletter editor for the forum. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a fantastic newsletter. We're just trying to get people good jobs. Well, Blair Nelson, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you, and looking forward to doing it again sometime. You're doing so many good projects. I'll have to have you back on to give us another shot of inspiration.
That'd be delightful, Sam. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be back with some more conversations for you later. In the meantime, take care and be well.